May we be of some assistance, Inspector Smythe?
General Farnsworth Armstead, one of the 6 surviving Waterloo Tontine ticket holders, has been murdered.
Waterloo Tontine?
The Waterloo Tontine was a lottery of sorts, Watson. It was set up in 1815 to aid the veterans of the Battle of Waterloo. Wellington's victory over Napoleon.
Yes, of course, I knew that.
Quite an ingenious plan on the part of the founders. £1 bought a ticket in the name of some young relative. The ticket proceeds amounted to over £1 million. Half went immediately to veterans and their families for medical and hardship expenses.
What became of the other half?
It all went into an account at the Bank of England, where it's been collecting interest all these years.
Very clever. And how does one win this prize?
Simply by outliving all the other ticket holders.
And now you say one of them has been murdered. Very suspicious. Who are the remaining 5?
The oldest is Captain Robert Jurgens, age 82. Then there are Anita and Claire Thomas, who are 80-year-old twins. William Rowland is 79, and Peter Dudley is 77. Poor General Armstead was the youngest at 74.
Seemed as if he would have had the best chance to outlive the others.
I recall reading something in the Times about a big to-do involving the Tontine survivors on the 18th.
That's correct. The Waterloo anniversary banquet at the Langham Hotel.
Why is the name Armstead familiar?
He was a noted art collector, I believe. He also authored a well-known book, Treasures of the Conquerors.
Quite right. At the time of his death, General Armstead was working on a revised edition for his publisher, Nugget and Company. It was to contain an entirely new chapter on a fabulous diamond called the Polar Star, which at one point belonged to Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. The general had new information which traced the gem to its present owner.
Tell me about the circumstances of General Armstead's death.
Oh, yes, of course. Well, let me see. At 10 o'clock this morning, the general's valet, David Sennett, admitted a caller to the general's study. Sennett says he did not know the man. He was elderly and spoke with a French accent. Sennett told him the general never saw anyone in the morning while he was at work. The gentleman insisted that if Armstead read the letter he had with him, he would make an exception. And so it was. Sennett took the letter in, Armstead read it, and went quite pale. He told Sennett to let the gentleman in. Sensing something amiss, Sennett dawdled in the area of the study for the next 15 minutes or so. Then he heard the distinct sound of swordplay. He tried to enter the study, but found the door locked. Then he heard the crash of breaking glass. He raced to the kitchen and out the back door to enter the study from the garden. By the time he got there, the caller had vanished, and the general was leaning heavily against a shattered display case of military miniatures. Before Sennett could assist him, he dropped a saber from his hand and fell over dead.
And I take it the letter, which so upset the general, was nowhere to be found.
Correct, Mr. Holmes.
Well, we shall put our brains and our feet to the task.
I found the general leaning over the display case. He had his saber in hand, the one that usually resides above the fireplace.
I understand he was a collector of military figures.
Yes, the display in the study shows the last great British charge that swept the French from Waterloo.
Is there any significance to the fact that the figure of Napoleon is facing backward?
How strange. Perhaps I should go and set it straight.
No, don't touch it. Not until the police have concluded their investigation.
Oh, yes, of course.
I also noticed the portrait over the display case.
The late Mrs. Armstead.
Do I detect a note of hostility?
I must admit we did not get on very well. But I might say that Mrs. Armstead did not get on very well with anyone, including the General.
You mean they didn't marry for love?
Hardly. Lord Fitch, Mrs. Armstead's father, arranged the match. Her dowry was very generous. Lord Fitch would have paid any amount to ensure that he would not be left with a spinster daughter, especially such a nasty one.
If there was no love lost between them, why did he keep her portrait in his study?
Actually, it was put up there to needle Mrs. Armstead's brother, the present Lord Fitch. He never approved of the marriage. Even after her death, they were involved with mutual business affairs. They jointly owned stock or some such thing.
Tell me, do you know what the General was doing at the time the intruder arrived?
Yes, he was working on the new section of his book, the part that concerns the gem, the Polar Star. It was very interesting, really. It traces the ownership of the gem to the brother of Napoleon, to the Russian Count Rostov. Unfortunately, the gem was stolen from the Count 3 years ago. As a matter of fact, the General just received a letter from a Pierre Montan, who said that he was willing to divulge the name of the present owner of the gem for the agreed-upon fee.
Do you know where Mr. Montan might be found?
I believe he's staying at the Bridge House Hotel.
Did the General have any encounters with anyone out of the ordinary in the past several days?
Not really. An old friend of his has been in town, Jean-Paul Girard. Neither the General nor I have seen him in 40 years. In fact, they were going to meet this afternoon at the French embassy.
I'm obviously curious about the General's last visitor. Could you describe him, please?
He was an old man, a rather short fellow. He walked with a cane and carried a carpet-bag.
Did he give a name?
No. He simply wanted to see the General, and he handed me a letter to take in to him.
Did you read it?
No. It was in an envelope, rather yellowed with age, though I noticed it was addressed in a graceful hand to Captain Armstead, 12th Hussars, the General's old regiment. When the General read it, he went very pale. Then he asked me to admit the gentleman.
Tell me, when you finally got into the room from the garden, were the study doors still locked?
Yes.
I noticed that there is an 8-foot fence surrounding the garden, and that the only way into the garden or out of it is through the kitchen door or the study.
How terribly observant, Holmes.
Farney and I spent over a year quartered together in France in War College. We became the best of friends.
Did you know much of the General's personal life at the time?
He always put the rest of us to shame in the matters of love. Said it was because we had no horse face to spur us on.
Did the General have a passion for horses?
Mon Dieu, no. He was engaged to a terribly unattractive woman by the name of Mary Fitch. Behind her back, that's what he called her. Horseface.
How dreadful. Whatever became of her?
She eventually became Mrs. Armstead and brought her great fortune to the marriage. I believe that Farney looked upon his stay in France as his last great fling.
Are you saying that there was no particular woman at the time?
I did not say that. There was one, but I never met her. My little flower, he called her. I remember one night he could not sleep. He was slightly drunk, and he kept rambling on about promises that must be kept and promises that couldn't be. Finally, he collapsed on the bed with such sadness in his eyes I will never forget it. Ma Fleurette, he said.
How very touching.
Have you seen much of the General over the years?
We have always maintained our friendship through correspondence, until last week, that is. It was the first time we had seen each other in over 40 years. We had supper, and then went to see the French actor Philippe Arnaud perform. The general commented that my presence beside him while French was being spoken reminded him of the old days.
So your visit went well?
Exceedingly well.
Can you think of anything that might have been troubling him?
No, the general was in excellent spirits. He joked about the upcoming Tontine celebration at the Langham, and he was very enthusiastic about the new information concerning the polar star. In fact, this week he was supposed to meet with a countryman of mine about it. It is hard to believe that my good friend is gone.
I admit I strongly disliked Armstead. He was a cad who made my sister's life miserable. I argued at length with my father against the marriage, but to no avail.
But what was your sister's opinion at the time?
Well, unfortunately, Mary was not the attractive sort who had scores of suitors. My father was afraid she'd be left a spinster. The engagement was arranged just before Armstead went to France. During the year he was gone, I had him watched, and discovered he was in the thick of some scandal involving a young French girl.
And you told your father?
Well, he wouldn't listen. I even went so far as to give the story to the newspapers. But my father got wind of it and used his influence to prevent its publication. I would have done anything to keep my sister away from that man.
Including murder?
Why, that's preposterous. Well, surely you don't think... I was scheduled to meet with Armstead today. But you see, my wife took ill. I spent the whole morning attending to her here until Dr. Ainstree arrived at around 11 o'clock.
We understand you were summoned to Lord Fitch's residence this morning.
Quite right. I received the message at around 9 o'clock and arrived at their home by 10. Lord Fitch met me at the door.
Would you care for some tea?
Thank you, no.
It's really quite good. We were just going to have some ourselves.
I really won't be staying long.
We get visitors so seldom.
Did you know the General?
We suppose he was at the last anniversary banquet.
But we don't believe we ever
Met him. We were so sorry to hear of
his death. It is such a pity.
Well, so, I imagine you ladies have thought about what you'd do if you won the Tontine money.
We have no living relatives, so there's no one
To share it with should we win. We need very little to
get by on. Undoubtedly, we would leave it to
the Ladies' League for the Preservation of Finches.
Been laid up for 2 weeks now with this blasted gout. Such a nuisance. Have to be carted about by my valet.
Perhaps you should try avoiding those rich foods.
Awfully sensible. But I always say might as well eat what you want now, because who knows what they'll be serving upstairs.
Oh, quite so.
Mr. Rowland, did you know General Armstead?
Not personally. I knew of him, of course. Our little group has become quite small. Terrible about his death. Me, I hope to die at the dinner table.
Provided that doesn't happen any time in the near future. Tell me, if you won the Tontine, what would you do with all that money?
There's a question to titillate the imagination. I've played around with that one every day for the past 20 years.
And?
I'm still working on it.
I understand that you have 2 sons in America and a daughter in London.
That's right. My sons own a very lucrative import company, and my daughter's married to a fine lad, Wentworth Cobbett, though he is a bit of a starving poet.
Now, what can I be doing for you, Governor?
I'm working with Sherlock Holmes. We're looking into the unfortunate death of General Farnsworth Armstead.
Oh, of course. I've just come off a job I had. My apologies for not looking me usual spit-polished self.
Oh, don't bother. I hardly noticed.
Make yourself at home. I wish the missus were here to offer up some tea.
That's quite all right. I won't keep you long.
Heard about the general. Didn't know him, of course. Had no cause to wish him harm, Tontine or no. But I've got to look at it philosophical-like. I'm the youngest now, so I've got the best chance of lasting the longest.
Captain, did you know General Armstead?
Armpit, you say?
Armstead.
Oh, Armstead. I knew that bloke. A jolly good fellow. Sat next to me at the last shindig back in '65. The 50th anniversary and all that rot. We had a grand old time swapping lies about our adventures on foreign shores. He swore by French damsels, but I argued for the China ladies. I hope they catch the deck-rat who killed him and hang him proper.
Have you seen the general since the 1865 banquet?
I've never seen the general with a blanket.
No, since the banquet.
Oh. No.
May I ask, what are your plans for the Tontine money, should you win it?
Spend as much of it as I can while I'm still alive and kicking, and leave the rest of it to the Seamen's Fund when I'm dead. Or some people think I should leave it to my only kin, me nephew, Booth Lacey. I never would, mind you. He's a bit of a laggard, has never done an honest day's work in his life. Could I outlast the others and be found the next day with my skull bashed in, look to Booth. He's sure to be holding the club in his hand.
Bloody shame it was about General Armistead's death.
How touching, Shinwell. You're really grieved to see him pass on.
Well, sure, I had me money on him. I should have trusted me instincts and gone with one of the ladies.
Captain Jurgens doesn't seem to have had much of a following, even at 25-1.
Nah, that's just Booth Lacey and his cronies, and that's really a sentimental bet. You see, Jurgens is Lacey's uncle.
What did you discover, Watson?
He wasn't in, Holmes, though his landlady suggested we might try the Red Bull Inn. The woman practically talked my ear off, went on and on about how Lacey constantly plays up to his uncle, Captain Jurgens, who's one of those old gents with the ticket in the Tontine. I thought she'd never hush up.
was wondering if you'd seen a Mr. Booth Lacey around here today.
Nope. Must be my lucky day.
Well, then, if it's your lucky day, why not spread some good cheer in the form of a pint and some food to that unfortunate chap standing outside your door? Poor bloke is missing an arm and a leg.
That poor bloke's your one and only Booth Lacey. Well, the whole thing's an act. He's as normal as you and me. Spends half his time begging out front and the other half swindling folks down at London Bridge Station.
Mr. Lacey, I see you still make your living by strapping your arms and legs behind you and fooling the poor public out of its tuppence.
Man's got to make a living somehow. What can I do for you, Holmes?
I want to ask you about the murder of General Armstead.
General who? Really, Lacey. Perhaps you can fool some of the public some of the time, but you can never fool Sherlock Holmes.
Oh, that General Armstead.
Where were you at 10 o'clock this morning?
Where else would I be? I was at church.
You, Lacey, at church? It hardly seems likely.
I swear, at St. Mary's. They pass out soup and bread every morning at 9:30. The father will vouch for me. You can even ask him.
I may just do precisely that.
I was wondering, Father, if you happen to know a man by the name of Booth Lacey.
I should say that I do. I see him every morning.
At Vespers?
Wish that it were. No, at our soup kitchen. We can pray for the unfortunates of this world, certainly, but we can also offer them a little sustenance of a more nourishing kind. Every morning at 9:30, our doors are thrown open to those less privileged than ourselves. And every morning, without fail, Booth Lacey is here.
You're certain of that?
I am. You see, with only one arm, he needs someone to carry his bowl to the table. Invariably, I am that someone.
How in the world did you hear about it so soon, Mr. Holmes? The body's still warm. Couldn't have happened more than 10 minutes ago.
Body? What body?
Well, the one what's upstairs in 203.
Oh, we're here for something else, actually. Looking for Pierre Martin.
Well, that's the very fellow what was done in.
Well, tell me, young man, do you know what transpired?
Well, Mr. Martin checked into the hotel on the 8th. He was a Frenchman. I didn't speak to him much.
Who discovered the body?
I did. Well, I came along to his room to deliver a wire. Here it is, sir.
Information still valuable. See me, Wells, Osborne, Norgate and Company, publishers. Tell me, did you see anyone suspicious hanging about?
No. No, sir. Well, actually, now that I think about it, there was a rather large man with a foreign accent. Russian, I think. He said that he wasn't sure about the address and that he'd only just arrived in London. He asked for Mr. Martin, and I sent him straight up. Well, he was rather well-spoken and well-mannered. I didn't think anything of it at the time. A few minutes later, he came down. He was practically running. I saw him go out the front door and hail a cab.
Was there anything amiss in the room?
Oh, I'll say. An inkwell was toppled on its side, left an awful mess on the carpet. Big blue spots and inky footprints right the way to the door. The manager will be in a fret when he sees it. Fortunately, there was no blood.
Perhaps he was strangled.
Count Rostov, Watson.
Count Rostov, Holmes?
According to the woman at the embassy, he is the only Russian national who has arrived in London in the past few days.
But how will we find him?
He is staying at De Kaiser's Royal Hotel.
However did you deduce that, Holmes?
Elementary, my dear Watson. I asked.
Are you from the police?
Were you expecting the police?
I was. My valet, Vladimir, reported to me that his interview with Pierre Matin was decidedly unproductive, as he was dead when Vladimir arrived.
I see. Tell me, why did he go to see Matin in the first place?
It was in reference to a certain valuable possession of mine that was stolen some years ago by Pierre's brother, André. I was in Paris, and I read in the London Times that General Armstead was to revise his very interesting book to include a chapter concerning that possession. Originally, I came here to visit him.
Then how did you discover Matin's whereabouts?
Shall we say, someone made me aware that Matin was also in London, that he was the general source of information. But when the General Armstead was reported dead, I had no other alternative but to pay a call on Matin. So I sent Vladimir, an old man's legs, you understand, to speak with him.
But you must see Philippe perform. My nephew's an artist, a wonder. He manages to portray the Emperor Napoleon from age 19 until his last days on the island of Salerno. You would swear 5 different actors playing the part, but no, it is only Philippe aging before your eyes. At 48, he's the toast of the continent.
You seem rather young to be the uncle of a 48-year-old man.
I am but 8 years older than Philippe, though I can assure you I am his uncle. You might say that our family has a history of late arrivals. Philippe's father was 25 years older than myself, and Philippe's poor sister was 15 years older than he.
Why do you say poor?
She died many years ago under tragic circumstances. In fact, her mother was so upset over her daughter's death that she was put into an asylum. We received word yesterday from the asylum that she had also passed away. It upset Philippe very much, resurrecting old ghosts, as you might say. But we have been playing for enthusiastic audiences for several weeks. As we say in the business, the show must go on. And Philippe is a trooper. He would never allow it to affect his performance.
Can you tell us where Philippe Arnaud is this morning? We should like very much to meet him.
Well, he is not here now. Our company is staying at the Grand Hotel. However, I believe today he is visiting the National Gallery. But if you would come back this evening, I will have tickets awaiting, and after the show, you are welcome to come backstage and meet him.
fortunate that Inspector Lestrade authorized the hotel manager to allow us to search Philippe Arnaud's room.
Perhaps we can return the favor and solve a case for him someday. Today, for example. Let's look around.
How strange that a man who requires a cane would leave without it.
Perhaps he doesn't require it for walking.
Look here at the handle. Well, that could certainly give a fellow a start.
Precisely, Watson. Look here. It appears to be a letter.
Looks quite old. It's addressed to Captain Armstead, 12th Hussars. Shall I read it?
Please do.
Dearest, how I hated you for leaving me, but the child, our child, eased my heartache and muted the hate. Now my sweet baby is dead. How cruel that the innocent must suffer for the sins of others. Now I have nothing. Now I am nothing. I cannot bear the pain. Goodbye, I love you still, Fleurette. How tragic. Why, perhaps this is the very letter that the General read.
Good thinking, Watson.
The court now stands in order.
I see we have the pleasure of your company, Mr. Holmes. I understand you've been investigating the murder of General Farnsworth Armstead.
That's correct, my lord, and I believe I have solved the case.
Do you now? Well then, tell me, who murdered the General? A brilliantly logical deduction, Mr. Holmes.
Thank you, my lord.
Now tell us, why was the General killed? Now, tell me, gentlemen, what was the General trying to say when he turned round the figure of Napoleon? Rather clever of the old boy, what?
Indubitably. A man who keeps his wits about him to the last has my undying admiration.
I was wondering, just for the record, could you tell us what the General used to call his wife?
Well, you've done an admirable job in resolving this mystery. I'd say you're on a par with just about any other armchair detective out there. I would suggest, however, that you rethink this case again, thereby improving your sleuthing skills.
We must be slipping, my dear Holmes. But in any event, I'm breathing easier. At least we got our men.
You say you've come up with a solution, and yet you sit there calmly cleaning your meerschaum. Please, Holmes, tell me what you've uncovered.
Of course, Watson. It's quite simple, really. The most intriguing fact about this murder was the method. Mr. Sennett's report that he heard the distinct sound of swordplay struck me as most odd. It suggested an affair of honor. At General Armstead's home, my suspicions were confirmed. The old letter addressed to Captain Armstead, a rank he'd held some 40 years ago, suggested that it must have concerned something from the past, something that was clearly upsetting to him. That was the reason for the duel.
But how can you be so sure there was a duel?
Simple reasoning, my dear Watson. The General had time to place his chair against the wall, climb upon it, and retrieve a saber. The murderer allowed him to arm himself. A duel is the only event that fits with the facts.
Are you sure the caller carried a sword? I thought all he had with him was a carpet bag and a cane.
Perhaps it only appeared to be a cane.
Ah, yes.
The intruder was described as an old man, yet he left the premises over an 8-foot wall. Clearly he was in disguise, and carried off the ruse with enough expertise to completely fool the General's manservant. The carpet-bag must have been used as the receptacle of the disguise when it was no longer needed.
Positively clever of you, Holmes. But what made you think it was Arnaud?
Well, since we were looking for someone adept at the art of disguise, Gerard's mention of the actor Philippe Arnaud struck a chord. Also, Arnaud plays Napoleon. No small coincidence.
What are you getting at, Holmes?
When the General turned round at the figure of Napoleon, he was trying to tell us that his murderer was Napoleon, or rather the actor playing Napoleon, Philippe Arnaud.
So Arnaud killed the general to avenge his long-dead sister's honor. Ah, well, unlike most of our cases, this motive was closer to the heart than to the pocketbook.
Quite so, Watson. When Arnaud's sister Fleurette was an impressionable young girl, she fell madly in love with the dashing English captain. When he left, she took her own life.
So pathetic.
Wait, there's more. Fleurette's grief-stricken mother went mad and was sent into an asylum. Thus, in the twinkling of an eye, little Philippe Arnaud, who was but a child himself, lost both his mother and his sister.
It's so sad. I'm sure he was too young to understand the circumstances that caused it.
Yes, but 4 decades later it all became clear when he found a letter written by his sister. It yielded an explanation and a name. Armstead. He came to London armed with that letter, and a sword came.
But he was here for several weeks before he did the deed.
Yes, and he might not have done it at all had it not been for the news of his mother's death. That was the final blow. He went straight away to the general's home to take his revenge. Voila.
Positively brilliant, Holmes. How do you do it?
This pipe cleaner, of course.